Hello and welcome to the Whole Health Cure. Today, I'm joined by two award-winning physicians, educators, and mentors. They've navigated many challenges in their life, career, and health and have mentored many others through similar challenges. Our conversation is about the lessons they've learned and how to break them down into microskills for your personal success. Adaira Landry is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School who studied and trained at the University of California, Berkeley, University of California, Los Angeles, New York University, and Harvard, with almost a decade of experience mentoring students and early career professionals. She is an entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and award-winning mentor. She co-founded Writing in Color, a nonprofit that teaches the craft of writing. Resa Lewiss is a professor of emergency medicine, TED Med speaker, Time's Up healthcare founder, designer, entrepreneur, and award-winning educator, mentor, and point-of-care ultrasound specialist. She studied at Brown University, the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, the NIH Howard Hughes Research Scholars Program, Harvard Emergency Medicine, and Mount Sinai St. Luke's Roosevelt. She hosts the Visible Voices podcast, amplifying content in the healthcare, equity, and current trend spaces. They are co-authors of the book Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact. Resa and Adaira, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, I want to ask each of you, you have certainly navigated many challenges in your own lives. So I wanted to start by asking, what is a challenge that was significant and how did it tie into your desire to want to mentor other people?
I'm happy to start. I grew up in an environment where I had very supportive parents and siblings as well. And they also were not very familiar with how to climb the educational ladder or the workplace ladder. Like we weren't ever talking about someone's network or mentorship or the difference between sponsorship and coaching. That just wasn't part of our language at home. And so I think even though I was very motivated academically, I didn't really know much beyond just like studying and taking a test. And so when I went to college and medical school, I felt like that was a pretty clear gap for me, like the value of mentorship, how a network could be leveraged. I knew it existed. I knew the terms. I had gone to seminars that were like, this is how network is important for you. But I never really felt like anyone sat me down and said, this is how you would build a network, nurture a network. This is how you would help the people in your network. So that part was quite challenging for me. And I do think that I ended up in a place where I'm very happy now, but it could have been much easier, faster, or just different. Like it could have been a completely different path had I had a different network along the way.
Yeah, I can definitely relate and resonate to that. And Resa, how about you?
So I think there are many things I could point to. The one I'll share today is about writing. Briefly, I always identified as a math science person, not as a writing, literature, history person. And sure, I wrote the essays to get into college, med school, residency, but I never identified as a writer. And this actually even went into 9 years of being an attending physician, faculty member. And I had a few little aha moments, but I had a big aha moment when I was seeking a job opportunity. And the hospital had always said, let us know when you want to join us, let us know. And so I followed up and I'm like, I'm ready. And again, 9 years into being a faculty member. And what the feedback was, it wasn't what was said, it was how it was said, was, Resa, I PubMeded you. What have you been doing? And it was like, oh. And I had known that writing was a currency because I could identify subject matter experts, and a lot were really those who had published. And that was part of the dip in the journey that then became, I would say, an ascent in the journey of learning how to write. And I'd always been a reader. I love books, I love words, and I love playing with words. But it was the first time I started intentionally reading about how to become a writer, working on writing, and figuring out how to work on writing, which came through some of the microskills we discuss in this book, like collaboration, asking for speaking opportunities, reaching out blindly to subject matter experts to see if you could join them in a project, And finally, this sort of how did I do the puzzle that was for writing, becoming an editor and editing for medical journals really helped become a better writer.
You've hit on so many things, Resa, that I think a lot of people struggle with. And, certainly if they're early career and trying to advance, there's people in transition. A lot of people are picking different jobs, different careers that require different skill sets. The hardest, I think, for a lot of people is how do I get started? It seems overwhelming. How would you advise people to get started?
I love this question. And you basically, without knowing it, set the perfect framework for Adaira and I to speak about the book. We wrote the book that we wish we had been given when we were starting out, full stop. And when writing the proposal and sort of pitching as to why this book needed to be written, we did a deep dive into the business self-help literature. And there are plenty of books that tell you how to work on your finances, how to work on your body and become physically fit, how to even navigate the workplace. A missing area that we found was, number one, the how. And they may say, go out and get a financial advisor, or, just start, reaching out to people, but they don't tell you the how. And we start in our introduction talking about 3 basic truths. One is time is only spent. And the second is that we don't start at the same place. All of us come from different backgrounds, different demographics, different resources. And when writing this book, we tried to make no assumptions to the best of our ability of where people were coming from. We tried to create an accessible handbook to help people navigate the workplace. So to your question about how to get started is find people, find resources like Microskills, the book, that tell you how, because I think that's the piece that's missing. People don't know how.
I have to give Resa all credit to this idea, but when we were making the table of contents, so the table of contents, if for anyone interested in writing a nonfiction book, is so critical. We had no idea until we really dug into it, like just how important it is to organize a book and make it feel organic in the way it grows and the way the reader grows and the clarity of the chapter, like all of that, we had no idea when we first started. But over time, we grew, we nurtured it, we iterated, we sharpened all the language. And Resa had this brilliant idea of really separating the table of contents out in such a way that someone could really just open the book and look at all of the skills that are covered in each chapter and turn to the topic they really want to learn. And so I think that specificity really speaks to just what we want to help the reader with, which is like targeting your needs based on what you feel like you have a gap in at that moment versus like needing to read this book cover to cover. We definitely don't want people to feel obligated to do that. But we've had a few people come to us and say, I had a friend of mine when I sent them this book early on say, I had to have a difficult conversation with a colleague and they read that chapter. And I think Resa actually has a similar story too, where she had a colleague who needed support with that one thing. And our goal is really to make this as accessible as possible. And, yes, to your question of how do people get started, it's finding people and resources that are really accessible and share the nuances, because I have definitely been a mentee or an advisee, and I've gone to someone and asked a question, how do you do this? How does this happen? And I unfortunately have gotten a wide range of responses, some of which are like, you just try, right? Like that doesn't help me. I need like specifics, like what buttons do I press? Who do I call? What moves do I make? Because otherwise you're just left figuring it out. And we really didn't want our reader left feeling like at the end of this, okay, this is great. I know I need to do stuff, but like, how do I actually do it?
What are examples of microskills and how would you break them down for people to get started?
So just for context, like many people in your listenership, if that's a word, Resa and I are both educators. And so we have learned through teaching in the realm of medicine that you can't really just tell a trainee or a student, go put in a central line, right? Like, go put in a central line, let me know when you're done. Like, there are so many steps to this procedure that are actually really small skills that will get you to the ultimate goal, right? The first skill is just checking to make sure the patient needs it, or and consenting the patient, checking the side or the position with which you will put the needle, holding the needle properly, making sure you're not penetrating the artery. Like, all of these are really tiny, small skills that will ultimately make someone feel comfortable with that procedure. It's the same idea when it comes to navigating the workplace, our professional lives, our personal lives, all of these things. You have this very large goal, right? Like, I want to be better at taking care of myself, but how do you do that? And there are small skills that you can take to move in that direction. Now, with each chapter, so we have 10 chapters. With each chapter, there are anywhere between, I think, 7 to 10 micro skills in that section. For instance, our chapter 1 is microskills for self-care. There are 9 microskills there. Certainly, we could have made that list even longer. There are many ways to care for the self, right? We could have gone even deeper into this, but we painted enough to just sort of show and illustrate that there are small steps that you can take, and these are more digestible. I like the word snackable, easier to apply than just having this large, overwhelming goal of, I need better self-care.
Resa, I want to ask you, of the skills that you touch on, and you guys cover so many really important ones, both for self-care, for career, just even life advancement. What do you think is the hardest microskill?
We get this question a lot, and thank you for that question. It does vary day to day. It varies conversation to conversation, and even what's on my to-do list, my task list. The one for me personally that threads through is microskills for holding a difficult conversation. As early as college, med school, residency, fellowship, facultyship, inside healthcare and even outside healthcare, difficult conversations are universal in every industry and every workplace. What differs is how people handle them. And so I had one supervisor who actually more than one supervisor who just full on avoided the difficult conversation. And I think many leaders, many people, it's human nature to avoid conflict, maybe. So these leaders hoped that the difficult situation that required a difficult conversation would just go away. And what I saw is they don't go away. And in fact, they kind of fester, grow, and it really affects team morale and productivity. I had a supervisor who, rather than holding the difficult conversation himself, handed it off to me. And I was a little slow on the uptick, but never again. Where he handed it off to me, and actually it wasn't my responsibility, and the content of the conversation wasn't my scope of roles in the emergency department. So both the person with whom I held the difficult conversation and I both realized what was happening. So ultimately, it was a reflection of him and his leadership. Now, I've had some amazing role models who I have witnessed directly and indirectly hold these difficult conversations. And it's like watching a beautiful film. It's amazing. And maybe that listeners may think that's an exaggeration, but it's not, because difficult conversations need to be held, personal lives, professional lives. And if done well, and I do believe they can be done well. In fact, there are books on how to difficult conversations, crucial conversations. Those are 2 texts that people may be familiar with. It really helps both parties and moves the work along in the workplace. So I tell a story in the book where it wasn't specifically a difficult conversation, but it was a feedback. And I delivered what I describe as an epic fail. This was a resident who was having challenges in the emergency department, was a focus of discussion at a faculty meeting. And I thought that this person had gotten some of this feedback, but the next time I worked a shift with her, we were all sitting, the shift was beginning, and I said, okay, the word for today is focus. And she just looked at me And she said, what do you mean? And I said, I want you to focus, because what had been discussed at the faculty meeting was she wasn't able to keep on top of tasks and task list. Patient dispositions weren't happening. More patients were being picked up, and just, things weren't moving along. So I was trying to help her with that. And in retrospect, the reason I describe it as an epic fail is, I didn't prepare her. I didn't prepare me. I didn't choose an environment or a situation that was conducive to having this feedback. And there's so many ways that I could have done it better. So, for example, the readers, the listeners, the audience may be like, well, that's great. You described a difficult conversation situation. What do I do? And so Adaira and I break down these skills into critical actions. So number one is role play, like go to your personal board of directors and role play. Number two, check in with the person, make sure the situation and the medium works. This is not a texting conversation. This is probably in person, or at least virtual, where you can see each other, and make sure there's psychological safety and all these types of points that I just described to create a good circumstance, a good setup for the difficult conversation are things we talk about in the book.
That's a really good one, Resa. I think there are a lot of times where people avoid those difficult conversations, both in work, at home, personal relationships. So I think it's a very useful skill. And it is a skill, right? Can you speak to how these things are not necessarily like some people are great at and other people's, just fail? Can you speak a little bit more to how to acquire that?
You keep feeding us the most perfect questions to talk about the motivation for this book and the exact challenges Adaira and I have had. We believe that every big project, big goal, big task, items that people think are just innate characteristics or traits can actually be broken down into small, concrete, fundamental building blocks. And so you can learn them. You can teach them. And we want the reader to gain this way of thinking about obstacles, things that are making them procrastinate, by breaking it down into small pieces.
Yeah. Adaira, how about you? What would you say is the biggest microskill that you think people should work on or encounter in a good approach or example in your life?
There are so many, and it really does depend on the day. I think one that has come up in the last few days. So I'm an advisor at the medical school, and so I advise a lot of Gen Z students who I believe just have a very different approach and viewpoint of what work is to them and means to them, and how they just have a very different level of comfort with speaking up about things that they feel are not correct. Now, the part of me that is all about self-care and self-compassion loves this. I think we need to change the workforce so that it is not so self-sacrificial, and people feel like they are in control over themselves and their time and the activities they're doing. Where it becomes a challenge is in the skill complaining carefully. And so that was one that we actually, the microskills called Complain Carefully. And we actually went through a few different titles. I think we initially had something to the extent of like fly. I think it was Fly Under the Radar, wasn't it, Resa? Right. It was Fly Under the Radar. And that was like the initial language for that microskill. We're just going to be totally open with you that we shared this microskill with other people, and they're like, that feels like not right. Like, especially our younger audience, they were like that doesn't work for us. Like we need to speak up and change things that are like wrong. And even though Resa and I didn't want people to like, be silent and never say anything, our initial thought was like, really complain carefully. And we just didn't have those exact words, because we have definitely seen people speak up and myself included, speak up to the wrong audience at the wrong time with the wrong language, with too strong of emotions, with not enough logic behind our reasoning, no evidence to support our stance. And so, just teaching someone how to complain or how to raise awareness is really important. And it really just starts with figuring out who you're talking to. What is the message you want to deliver? Do you have a possible solution for the problem you're raising, even though you might not be the one, needed to carry out the solution? At least raising that helps sort of demonstrate your thought process behind the complaint. And all of these things are skills, and it's not necessarily just like a personality trait. It's something that you can learn how to do.
And Adaira, some people don't necessarily have the self-awareness that they need to work on a skill or trait. So people reading this book seek self-improvement, and clearly they've identified that perhaps they could ask better or nicer. How do you help people even have that self-awareness that they are not succeeding, or that the way they delivered or communicated was perhaps a way that could be refined?
So yes, it's really hard to help people who don't buy the book, right? Because they're not really our people who aren't reading the book aren't our target audience. So there is this like gap there with the folks who believe they don't need help, or they are perfect. That's just in general a much harder audience to reach, like for any writer. For those who have the growth mindset and who are interested in learning how to be better, one of the things that we included in our structure of the book, and it's probably worth just reviewing. So every chapter has, like I said, 7 to 10 micro skills. Each micro skill starts with a personal story. And the reason why we did that is to show the truth, which is that Resa and I are writing about our own personal experiences or our own personal observations. So we're not writing made up stories. We're not writing about like Janet or Bob, who we've never met. They're just fictional characters. Like these are all from us. And we do that to hopefully normalize to the reader, like this can be any of us. Like even someone as successful as Resa or as myself, like we have struggled too. And we have a combination of wins, and losses or failures. And because we needed to show the spectrum, right? Like everything is not rosy for anyone. And so hopefully that's like the biggest way we can really get buy-in from folks is by showing that the people writing this book have also made mistakes. We also then go into why we need the book, because we just think it's important to just make sure it's very clear to people the impact of making change, the impact of not making change. And the next section of the micro skill is why it's hard to change. And we put that in there again to just normalize that we can all have certain ambitions that have obstacles in front of them, like fear, like time or bandwidth, like money, like a lack of network. Those can all be barriers for each of us. And then after that, we go into the critical actions, which is like the breakdown of the actual micro skill. So to your point of like, how do you reach people? I think for any author, it's how you structure the content you're delivering and making it accessible, but also really showing your own vulnerabilities as a writer. And I think that helps relate to the reader. There's, of course, a section of people who are never going to read self-help books and never, want to change. And that's just in general a really hard audience for anyone to read, but to reach. But I think it's a fair point for us to just discuss, like, how do you get to those people? I think that goes back to Resa's skills of the difficult conversation that she went over earlier, which is like letting someone know there's a problem.
And from the time a person wants to improve or gain a skill or change career or be in a different place, usually once a person starts that process, they start to think that they're so far behind, other people are ahead of them, that they are just not where they want to be. There's always that initial reaction. How would you say, in terms of, from the time a person starts trying to build a micro skill, how long does it take? What's a good trajectory to how do you even know if you're on pace, if you're really improving your personal trajectory?
It's a great question. We haven't gotten this yet in terms of sort of timeline. And what we can say is that all the microskills are additive and they build upon each other. And I think this goes back to, you can gauge how you think you're doing yourself, but going to your personal board of directors and having your mentors or sponsors or peer coaches or even your best friends check in with them and say, how am I doing? Talk to them about something you want to work on, see if they see any differences, ask them to take note, and that you'll check in with them to see if there are any differences. So I can't say I can commit to, quote, a timeline, but the tagline on the front of the book is buy this book on Friday, be better at your job on Monday. And we share that because they're very digestible actions that people can take like right away. And that being said, maybe this is sort of the study we should do, the descriptive study, or even the convenient sampling study once the book is out, and we circle back with people in 6 to 12 months.
Well, I will say that when we were reading the comparative titles for the book, in the beginning process of writing a book, you have to read a bunch of books that are in similar categories. And so Resa and I had already read a bunch of business self-help books to begin with, but we refreshed by reading more or the same ones over again. And there was one glaring theme that we found, which was this idea that a lot of books are written by people with privilege, so older, cis hetero white men, who are, executives. Many books are written by like CEOs or C-suite, position holders. And that's not everyone, right? Like the vast majority of people walking around the world don't live that life. And so when you hear something as simple as go out and just work harder, that's really hard if you are a single mom with 3 kids, or if you are a woman of color, or you're a person with a disability and you have medical needs that sort of preclude you from being able to work around the clock, right? Like all of these things just didn't feel relatable. So for us, we really wanted a book that spoke to a much wider audience. That was very important to us. So you're not going to hear or read in our book solutions such as go get an MBA. Like if you want to change your career, go get an MBA. Like there's a lot of privilege behind that recommendation. And so we really tried to find things that are accessible to everyone, and more on the line of easily implementable. So you don't have to wait 2 years or so to see change. It's really focused on what can you do right now. So of course, there's going to be things beyond what we recommend that people can get. Like there's nothing wrong with getting an MBA, but we really wanted to adhere to this idea of like fast implementation, accessible to all.
And with the time we have left, I want to ask each of you, what was the experience like writing this book, and how did it change you in the process?
Writing a book is hard. This is my first time writing a book of any sort. I mean, I've written like a children's book, but it's not the same. And so for a book like this, it takes about 3 years. So from the time we started it to the time it will drop, it's about 3 years, because I started the proposal part when I was on maternity leave with my 3rd child. And so that would be this April. When it'll be 3 years. So it's a long process, and it ramps up in different, and it goes in waves as far as how much time you are needing to spend on the project. There are lulls in the beginning where you're like waiting to hear back from publishers. So I think that part was a little bit hard to navigate, because you don't really know when this like next bolus of time is going to be needed from you. So I think the time management part was very interesting to navigate. I think I'm a better writer. I don't want to speak for Resa, but I'm assuming she is as well. Like I feel like I'm a better writer. I feel like a better writer now than I was when we started this book. And I almost feel like if I had to write it again, I know it would be even a much stronger, clearer book, because I just really understand the process of putting a message together, timing this entire journey. I would understand that much better as well. And then just like learning how to market a book. Like that's all, everything you're doing is new because it's the first time you've done it.
I'll share, for people that know me, know that one of my main goals in life is to be a polyglot. I love speaking languages, and I'd love to speak many, many, many languages. And that's not just purely like a language, writing a book, and as Adaira just alluded to, the whole book writing industry, the book launch industry, it's a whole thing. And the language I've acquired, the words I've acquired, the reason it took 3 years is we went a very traditional route with getting an agent and going to auction with a publisher. Not everybody goes that way, so everybody's path is different. And for me, it has been so much more fun than I would have imagined. I was up for this, and I imagined it would be fun, but it's been so much more fun than I would have imagined. The writing, and there's no question that I'm a better writer just by doing it. It's like exercising. You get better. Practicing, you get better. And it is really meaningful to have people read it, reflect back that the content speaks to them and that it's a useful tool. Like, we really, really wanted to create content that would be helpful to people, similar to as physicians, like we take the Hippocratic Oath to help. The goal in writing this is to help. And gosh, there are so many things that I learned that I could have learned quicker, more efficiently, and if someone had just told me. So I really hope that the book resonates with people. And the other side of this book is just even more knowledge, even more consolidation of experience, and just a feeling that if this helps even one person, and if it even helps you, Sharon, or helps your listeners, then we're done. We're done. Mic drop.
Where can people find both of you and the book?
We are on all of the socials. So we are on Twitter/X, Instagram, LinkedIn. And if you just type in our names, we're pretty easy to find. And then we also have our own personal websites. Again, if you just typed in our name, you'd probably find it. But I am AdairaLandryMD.com and Resa is ResaLewisMD.com.
So the book is available wherever people buy books, whether it's online, Amazon, bookshop.org, fill in the blank. Independent bookstores will carry. If not, you can request that they carry. Local libraries, and for the audio files, you can listen to it on audio. And Adaira and I narrated the book, so another fun piece of the process.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited for this book to be available. So it's April 16th, I believe, is the date it will be in people's hands. And I'm sure you'll get tremendous feedback from the skills that people will learn. I know going through the chapters, I could definitely nod my head as I was going along, because I think those are a lot of the same hard-learned lessons that I had learned and still continue to learn. I think we're all on a continuous journey. So I want to thank both of you. I wish the book tremendous success. I know it will be. And I do believe you are going to make a big difference in a lot of people's lives.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. That means a lot.